Si here. I was asked by 2 different people to make 3 cutting boards. So, get started on that. Woohoo! So I started planing and ripping up wood that I had. And once I had some boards ripped up and cut to length, then I ran those all through the drum sander to get them all even. I finally got to the point where I could lay them out how I wanted and glue them up. While he was on the pillow and Gibby was following me around, I think he thought I was headed back down to the house, so sorry Gibbs, not yet. I sanded some fuzzies off the edges of the boards and then I laid them out to get started gluing them up. I'm using Titebond 3 because it says it's waterproof. I got all that glued up and clamped and was pretty excited about it. So the next day I continued on with the other 2. I started ripping down the boards I had and I was using up a bunch of the piles of wood I've had for a while. I have acquired quite the stash of different sizes and thicknesses and husband was very happy to see me using it up. I was having such a good time ripping up all these boards, I thought, well, I could make a whole bunch of cutting boards. And then the people that asked me to make the boards, they could have a choice. So I enjoyed trying different patterns and thicknesses and widths and lengths and all that stuff. As I was making them, I found I needed to number the pieces to keep track of the pattern. This one big board I was making, I glued up in sections. Then I had 3 big and heavy sections all ready for the next step. And when those were set up, I took them out of the clamps. Since it's on the long grain right now, I'm going to run it through the planer. And then after I'm done planing it, then I'm going to glue these 3 together and go from there. So, yeah. First I got to get all the big glue nubbins off. As I was gluing up more boards, I figured out what to do to avoid having nubbins like this. And since this was long grain, I ran them through the planer, which made things so much quicker than the sander. So now I'm going to glue these 3 pieces together. Woohoo!
It's all without it being itself.
Hi.
Oh, she's filming.
Husband and our friend Keith came in. Keith was working on the dining room table he was making, and husband was taking care of stuff around the property.
Yeah, I've got other stuff I Detail. Get all picky about the details. Hey, where's that paperwork?
Once I got the sections together, I saw that I needed to straighten up the sides I was going to be gluing. I used the jointer and it had some tear out, but it wasn't enough to ruin what I was doing, thankfully. And I was able to glue all of those together. I also learned the difference, well, kind of, between a jointer and a joiner, and this is what I learned. A website said, a jointer is a woodworking machine that smooths and flattens the face and edge of stock lumber to make it perfectly square. Instead of running a tool against wood, like one would do using a hand planer, with a jointer, the wood is pushed against the tool. Cool. So the tool I used was definitely a jointer. And as I was planning another one that I had glued up, I cut my finger on the corner of the planer, right on the knuckle. Right there. I'll play it again in slow motion because it's crazy that it cut my finger. And I didn't feel it until a few seconds later. And it was gushing blood. It made a flap of skin right over that knuckle. So I had to tend to that, and I made a large bandage and used rubber bands to hold it tight. And it was good enough to keep on working for a little while. I ended up sanding the edges of the planer table. It was so sharp all the way around, I was surprised I hadn't cut myself on it before. So beware out there. The next day I started gluing up more boards, and I graduated down to some normal band-aids. The flap of skin that was cut was so scalpel straight and smooth that it ended up healing really fast. So yay, I guess? I discovered that I liked gluing in sections, so I glued 3 separate sections again. gonna start cutting these up. Ah! Now it was time to start cutting up the boards to make them into end grain boards. I measured and marked it to make it equal, but when I cut the pieces out, it didn't matter where I marked it because it didn't cut on the markings. But they were all the same in the end, so that's all that matters. So I didn't mark the rest of the boards I made, I just cut them. Then I turned them to make them end grain and flipped every other one to make the design.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. Yeah.
And I hand sanded off the fuzzies. Then I glued them in sections again, trying to line things up. Now I can wipe my nose. Ah. Okay, let's take a gander. I've got those lined up there and there. 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 And here. Yes. Whew. Can't wait to see how that one's gonna look. When those were dry, I ran them through the sander real quick, and then they were ready to be glued together. And again, I used the jointer. Then glued those three pieces together. Next, I cut this one and sanded off the fuzzies. And again, turned them for end grain and flipped every other for the pattern, but I saw I didn't lay out the boards right when I glued them up, so the pattern was off, sort of. So I messed up, of course, and so I'm just gonna alternate it like that, and I'll lose some width of my board, but it is what it is. And that worked, but it was a good lesson for me to think about the pattern and the layout when gluing them up. And now I had learned to wipe off the glue with a cloth to reduce the nubbins of glue that I would have to take off later. And after they were set up, then I ran those sections through the sander and they looked like they were going to be a good medium size. This is the granddaddy of them all. I was asked to make a really big board and I was loving the way this one was turning out. Here you can see I have already cut it the second time and glued the sections, and now I'm gluing the entire thing together. Here it is now after I've sanded it with a few grits. I was asked if I could add a juice groove. I've attempted a juice groove before and it went a little rough, so I was a bit nervous. However, I had a nice round base on this router and the correct router bit for the juice groove. I also had gotten something from my friend that showed me which way to use the router, so I was going the correct way this time and not let the router catch and get away from me. Basically left to right when making the groove, and right to left when working on the outside edge of the board. I went slow and made 4 or more passes, but it still ended up burning some. Then I made a jig thing like some plywood and used that to cut out some fingertip spaces to hold onto the cutting board. I used a smaller router for this. Yay! Ah! Hey there! I am going to put a little edge around the cutting board just so it's not so square. And again, I used the smaller router and went from right to left. And I did that on the top and on the bottom. Then I grabbed all my other boards and did all of their edges too. I was happy it was working out so well. A happy dance ensued. Now I see that Wally was watching me and thinking, what in the world is she doing? Next was sanding everything. I sanded with multiple grits, spraying everything with water between each grit to raise the grain. And the last grit was 320. And there is my pile of 10 boards, but I ended up making 15. I was watching a YouTube video of somebody making some really, really neat boards, and he said to spray water in between the grits. So I made this real quick With these dowels, I made this thing to hold the boards while they're drying. You can tell those are dry already, but so now I put a pencil mark on this like that. And now I am sanding with 120. Yeah. And that's what I did with all of the grits. I used a pencil and marked it, and then I sanded off those pencil marks, trying to make sure I get in the whole board. And sorry, the video was blurry. Then when I had one grit done, I would spray them all with water and put them in my new handy rack to dry. And here is my favorite one, and woo! It looked awesome when I sprayed it with the water! More happy Debs! And this drying rack was so handy. Alrighty, everything's been sanded to 320. Woo! And man, is it smooth. And I am going to put mineral oil on them and let them sit for 48 hours, and then I'm gonna put the beeswax mineral oil combination onto them. Yeah, I'm excited to see how it looks with the mineral oil. Woohoo! This is a technique I learned from watching that amazing cutting board guy. His name is Ryan Hawkins. I learned a lot from watching him, and I need to learn a lot more, but I appreciated the things he said and gleaned some good nuggets. I only had a small container of mineral oil, so I had to order some more, but used what I could for now. And the wood really soaked it in. Ryan recommends leaving the mineral oil soaked boards for 48 hours before adding the wax. And I said that wax was beeswax earlier, but it is carnauba wax. And it is a carnauba and mineral oil mixture that I'm going to put on as the second coat. Check it out. Woo! Love it. Yeah. Ooh, man. Okay. Set it over here. Next. I'm gonna let those sit for about 48 hours. Whew, yeah. So awesome. So after 48 hours, I coated everything with the wax oil mix, coating them all and then wiping them until they felt dry and let them set up for a day or so. So thanks for joining me, everybody, while I made these cutting boards. Woohoo! My time in the shop seems to be limited lately, and I'm missing it. So I have lots of stuff I want to do in here, of course, like always. But the cutting boards, those were a priority. And then I didn't make just 3. I had to make like 15. But that's okay. Anyway, we will see you next time. Bye! And I added some feet on some of them too.